The laughter was what caught me first. Not the good kind, not the rumble that rolls through the pit after a clean strike, when warriors slap each other's shoulders and the crowd stamps its feet in approval. This was the other kind. The sharp, wet sound of a crowd finding someone small enough to swallow. I leaned forward in my seat. The pit of Fang had been cut from Valdrin's bones 400 years before I was born. A stone arena sunk into the belly of the mountain, open to sky at the top, so the moon could judge the fighters alongside the crowd. Every year the trial drew warriors from every corner of my territory. Young bloods looking to prove they deserved rank, old fighters refusing to let the years take what their blades had earned, pack wolves from outlying holds who wanted to be seen. The rules hadn't changed since the founding. A wolf entered the pit. The trial beasts were released. If the wolf survived, if the beasts acknowledged him, he rose in standing. If he didn't, he was carried out. Simple, ancient, honest. The names had been read since dawn. I'd watched 8 warriors walk the ramp already, some steady, some shaking, all of them built for it. Broad-shouldered men and sharp-eyed women with scars they'd earned and blades they'd sharpened the night before. The crowd cheered for them or cursed them, depending on old grudges and gambling debts, but there was respect in even the jeering. The trial was sacred. Everyone who entered it deserved the weight of the moment. Then my herald read the 9th name, and the pit erupted. A shackled. Nothing for a heartbeat. Then someone in the lower stand snorted. Then another. The laughter built like a wave, cresting from the warrior benches near the floor all the way up to the merchant rows along the rim. I didn't know the name. It meant nothing to me, not a warrior's line, not a family from any hold I could place. I turned to Brennick, my second, who stood a step below my seat with his arms crossed. He was already shaking his head. "Kitchen staff," he said, low enough that the crowd couldn't hear. "Works the north wing. Bread ovens mostly." I looked back at the arena floor, and I saw her. She was coming down the ramp. Not walking the way warriors walk it, shoulders squared, eyes on the sand, fists clenched at their sides. She walked the way someone walks when they've been shoved and have decided not to stumble. Her back was straight, but her steps were careful, like she was picking her way through something she hadn't asked for and didn't intend to fall in. She was small, not frail, but small the way a whetstone is small next to the blade it sharpens. Her hair was tied back in a plain knot. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and even from my seat 20 feet above the floor, I could see the pale dust of flour on her forearms. She was wearing a kitchen apron. The crowd howled. I scanned the warrior benches and found what I expected. Commander Garin, thick-necked and grinning, with his arms slung over the seat behind him and his boots up on the railing. His 2 lieutenants, Falk and Messner, were doubled over beside him, red-faced, tears streaming. Garin caught my eye and shrugged in an exaggerated show of innocence. Around him, a dozen of his men were slapping their knees and pointing at the ramp. I understood immediately. The trial was open entry. Any pack member could put any other pack member's name into the stone jar. It was an old tradition designed so that a reluctant warrior could be called forward by his peers. A point of honor meant to say, "We believe you're ready even if you don't." Garin had taken that tradition and turned it into a joke. He'd put a kitchen maid's name in the jar because it would make his men laugh, and because he assumed she'd refuse the ramp and be publicly humiliated, branded a coward in front of the whole stronghold. But she hadn't refused. She reached the bottom of the ramp and stopped at the center mark, the worn stone circle where every fighter stood before the beasts were released. She looked up at the open sky, then down at the sand. Her hands were at her sides. She wasn't clenching them. The herald looked to me. Tradition required the presiding alpha to confirm every entrant. A nod and the trial began. A shake of the head and the entrant was dismissed, no dishonor. I could have shaken my head. It would have been the reasonable thing, the kind thing even. She was a kitchen maid. The trial wolves were not pets. 3 of this morning's warriors had been pulled from the sand bleeding, and one was still unconscious in the healer's tent. Sending her in was sending her to be mauled. But she was looking at me now, and her eyes stopped me. They were steady, not brave the way a warrior's are, that hard, hot steadiness that comes from training and rage and the desire to prove something. This was quieter. It was the steadiness of someone who had been pushed and pushed and pushed, and who had decided, somewhere between the kitchen and the ramp, that she was done being pushed without pushing back. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look angry. She looked like she was waiting for me to decide whether she was worth a trial, and she had already decided the answer for herself. I nodded. The crowd went from laughter to murmuring. A few voices rose, protests from the healer's row, from the older pack members who knew what the trial wolves could do. Someone shouted, "She'll be killed." And someone else, one of Garen's men, shouted back, "That's the entertainment." The iron gate at the far end of the pit groaned open, and the first trial wolf came out. His name was Ashen. He was the oldest of the trial pack, a gray and black male the size of a young horse, scarred across the muzzle, missing half his left ear from a fight 6 seasons ago. He had put 3 warriors on their backs this morning alone. When the gate opened, he came out low and fast, the way he always did, head down, shoulders bunched, a growl building in his chest that you could feel through the stone seats. The crowd pulled in its breath. I leaned forward. My hand was on the rail. If the wolf lunged, I'd be over the wall and on the sand in 3 seconds. I'd done it before. I'd do it now. Ashen crossed the sand in 4 strides. Ashad didn't move. Her feet stayed planted on the center mark. Her hands stayed open at her sides. She watched the wolf come. And then 3 paces from her, Ashen stopped. I have watched thousands of trials. I know what a wolf looks like when it pulls up because it's circling, recalculating, waiting for a better angle. This was not that. Ashen stopped the way a wolf stops when it meets something it doesn't understand and isn't sure it's allowed to challenge. His head came up. His ears flattened, not in aggression, but in confusion. He sniffed the air between them and the growl died in his throat. The crowd went quiet. Ashen lowered himself to the ground. Not a crouch, not a stalking position. He pressed his belly flat to the sand and put his scarred muzzle between his paws, and he stayed there. His yellow eyes looked up at her, and if I had to put a word to what I saw in them, it would have been recognition. Ashakeld hadn't moved. She stood with her flour-dusted arms at her sides, looking down at the wolf that had dismantled warriors twice her size all morning, and her expression hadn't changed. That same quiet steadiness, as if this, too, was something she'd been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. Garen had stopped laughing. I could see him from the corner of my vision. His boots were off the railing now, and he was sitting forward, squinting at the sand. The crowd was murmuring again, but differently, uneasy. "Release the second," I said. Brennick looked at me sharply. "Alpha." "Release the second." The gate opened again, and Storm, a younger female, silver-white, faster than Ashen and twice as aggressive, burst onto the sand at full sprint. She covered the distance in 2 heartbeats, claws tearing the ground, her jaws wide, a sound coming from her throat that I'd heard wolves make only before a killing strike. She reached a shell and veered. Not away. Not in retreat. She veered around her in a tight circle once, twice, and then she too went to the sand, belly down, muzzle between her paws, eyes up. "Ronan," Brennick's voice was different now, "look at the floor." I looked. The runes on the arena floor, the ones carved into the stone 4 centuries ago by the pack's founding Alpha, the ones that hadn't done anything in living memory except collect sand and rainwater, were glowing. Not brightly, not the way a torch glows or a bonfire. They glowed the way embers glow when you breathe on them, a deep, steady amber gold that traced the carved lines and made them legible for the first time in decades. The light ran from rune to rune in a pattern I'd seen only in old drawings, in scrolls I'd studied as a boy and half believed were myths. The trial spiral, the founding pattern, the path that, according to the oldest records, only lit for one bloodline. Ashen Moor. The words surfaced in my mind like something breaking through ice. Ashen Moor, the founding blood, the line that had carved the pit and bred the trial wolves and established the pack's covenant with the moon. The line that had vanished 3 generations before I was born, killed off in the border war, or so every history I'd ever read insisted. No survivors, no heirs, the blood gone from the world. But the runes didn't lie. The runes couldn't lie. They were older than the stronghold, older than the pack's memory, and they answered to nothing except the blood they'd been carved to recognize. And they were answering to her. Something happened in my left wrist, a sensation I had never felt, or rather, a sensation I had waited 30 years to feel and had stopped believing I ever would. I was 14 when the bonding rite was cut into my skin. Every Alpha's heir received it, a small, precise scar on the inner wrist, inked with wolf ash and sealed by the pack's elder. It was supposed to burn when your fated mate was near. A warmth, they said, a pull you couldn't mistake for anything else. Mine had been cold since the day it was cut, cold and smooth and dead like a stone in still water, 30 years. I'd had it checked twice, had asked the elders if perhaps the rite had been done wrong, if the scar tissue was too thick, if the ash had gone stale. They'd shaken their heads each time. The rite was correct. The scar was waiting. My mate simply hadn't come. In 30 years, the scar had never so much as itched. Now it burned. Not gently, not the way you describe warmth to a child. It burned the way a blade burns when it comes out of the forge, clean and absolute and impossible to ignore. I grabbed my wrist before I knew I was doing it, and when I looked down, the scar was glowing the same amber gold as the runes on the arena floor. The same light, the same blood. I raised my head and looked at a shack held, and the pit, the crowd, the wolves, the 400 years of tradition carved into the stone beneath my feet. All of it made a sound in my chest like a door that had been locked for 3 decades finally, quietly opening. She was mine. The thought arrived without drama, without trumpets, without the sweeping grandeur I'd imagined as a young man when I'd still believed the bond would come. It arrived the way dawn arrives, not because anything decides it should, but because it was always going to, and the only question was how long the dark would last. My mate was standing in the center of my arena with flower on her sleeves and 2 trial wolves at her feet, and the founding runes of my bloodline were singing for her, and she didn't know. She didn't know any of it. She thought she'd been thrown into a fighting pit as a joke, and she'd come anyway, and she'd stood still while 2 wolves the size of horses charged her, and she hadn't flinched. "Release the rest," I said. Brennick grabbed my arm. He'd never done that before. "All of them. Ronan, there are 9. Release them all." The gates on both sides of the pit crashed open, and 9 wolves poured onto the sand. The crowd surged to its feet. Screams, shouts, the sound of people who believed they were about to watch a woman die. I heard Garen's voice cutting above the noise. "Get her out. Someone get her out." And the sick irony of it, the man who'd put her name in the jar now panicking, because his joke had gone further than his courage could follow. The wolves hit the sand running. 9 of them, gray, black, silver, tawny, a wall of muscle and teeth and noise that made the arena floor shake. They converged on the center from all sides, and Ashash stood among them like a stone in a river. They didn't touch her. One by one, not slowly, not with hesitation, but with the deliberate, certain movement of wolves who know exactly what they are doing, they went to the ground. Belly down, muzzle between paws, a circle of wolves around a woman in a kitchen apron, every one of them pressing as close to her as they could get, not in threat but in something I had never seen trial wolves do in all my years of watching. Devotion. They were guarding her. The pit went silent, not quiet silent. The kind of silence that happens when a crowd of 3,000 people all stop breathing at the same moment. I could hear the wind crossing the open top of the arena. I could hear the wolves breathing, slow and even. I could hear my own heartbeat, and I could hear, or perhaps I only imagined I could hear hers. Ashad looked down at the wolves around her. She knelt slowly and put her hand on Ashen's scarred head. The old wolf pressed into her palm like a pup. The runes blazed brighter. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping back on the stone platform echoed through the pit like a crack of thunder. Every eye in the arena turned to me, 3,000 faces, all of them stunned, confused, afraid, some of them beginning to understand. I walked down the steps. There are 42 steps from the Alpha seat to the arena floor. I know this because I have walked them before to end fights, to carry wounded warriors, to address the crowd after the final trial. I have never walked them the way I walked them then, not as the presiding Alpha, not as the judge, not as the pack's highest authority performing a duty. I walked them as a man who had waited 30 years for a door to open and had just heard the lock turn. The crowd parted where they spilled onto the lower steps. No one spoke. No one touched me. The silence had weight to it now, the way snow has weight accumulating, pressing down on everything it covered. I reached the sand. The wolves didn't move. They stayed in their circle around her, but their eyes tracked me, and not one of them growled. Ashen's tail moved a single, slow sweep against the sand. The old wolf knew. I crossed the arena floor, and with every step, the runes beneath my feet pulsed brighter, answering my blood, answering hers, the two patterns finding each other after 400 years of silence. The Ashenmoor spiral and the Dravik line, the founding blood and the ruling blood. The trial hadn't been built to test warriors. That was what we'd turned it into over the centuries as we forgot. It had been built to find this, to find her. She looked up at me. She was still kneeling, her hand on Ashen's head, wolves pressed against her on every side. She had sand on her knees now to go with the flower on her sleeves. Her face was calm, but not empty. There was something moving behind her eyes, a question she didn't know how to ask because she didn't have the language for what was happening to her. I held out my hand. Not a command, not a king's gesture demanding a subject's response. I held it out the way you hold a lantern towards someone standing in the dark, not to pull them, but to show them where the light is. "Stand with me," I said. My voice carried across the silent pit, and I heard the words land on every stone seat, every stunned face. I heard Garen make a small, strangled sound from the warrior benches. I heard Brennick exhale. Asha looked at my hand. She looked at my face. She looked at the glowing scar on my wrist, the bonding rite, visible now, unmistakable, pulsing in time with the runes beneath us. "I don't understand," she said. Her voice was low, steady, clear, not a whisper, not a plea, a statement. "You will," I said, "but first stand." She took my hand. Her fingers were rough, rougher than any courtwoman's, rougher than most warriors. The hands of someone who had spent years hauling dough and scrubbing iron and pulling bread from ovens that could scar you if you flinched. When her skin touched mine, the scar on my wrist went from burning to singing. A clean, high note that I felt in my teeth and my spine and the base of my skull. And I understood, with a certainty I had never felt about anything in 30 years of rule, that I would sooner cut this hand off than let go. I pulled her gently to her feet. The wolves rose with her, pressing closer, a living wall of silver and gray. Storm, the aggressive one, the one who'd never let anyone touch her in 4 years of training, pushed her head under Asha's free hand and stayed there. I turned to face the crowd. 3,000 faces stared back at me. Some I knew by name. Some I'd fought beside, dined with, argued with in council. They had come for the trial, for blood and spectacle, and the old, reliable drama of warriors testing themselves against wolves. They had not come for this. They were not ready for this. But the runes were still glowing, and the wolves were still kneeling, and the scar on my wrist was still singing, and I was not going to explain destiny to people who could see it with their own eyes. "The trial has spoken," I said. The words hit the silence and held. They were the formal declaration, the oldest words in the trial's tradition, spoken by the Alpha when the wolves accepted a fighter. But they had never been spoken like this. They had never been spoken for a woman in a kitchen apron. "This woman carries the blood of Ashenmore." The murmur started low, like water under ice. Ashenmore. The name passed through the crowd the way fire passes through dry grass, quick, unstoppable, changing everything it touched. Ashenmore, the founding line, the lost blood, the bloodline every child in Valdren learned about in their first history lesson, the way humans learn about ancient kings who built the world and then vanished. The runes have answered her, the trial wolves have answered her. I lifted my left wrist, the glowing scar visible to every eye in the pit, and the bonding rite has answered her. The silence that followed was different from the one before. The first silence had been shock, the breathless, uncomprehending pause of a crowd watching something impossible. This silence was understanding. This silence was the sound of 3,000 people realizing, all at once, that the kitchen maid they'd laughed at 10 minutes ago was the most important person in Valdren. I looked at Garin. He was standing now, boots on the ground, hands at his sides, the grin gone from his face like it had been scraped off with a blade. His lieutenants flanked him, equally pale. Behind them, the dozen warriors who had laughed the loudest were staring at the sand between their feet. "Commander Garin," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The pit carried sound the way a bell carries a strike. "You entered this woman's name into the trial jar. Confirm it." He swallowed. His throat worked visibly, the thick muscles in his neck knotting and releasing. "Alpha, I confirm it." "Yes." The word came out like something pulled from him by force. I entered her name. "For what purpose?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone in the pit knew. Everyone had heard the laughter, seen the pointing, felt the ugly delight of a crowd watching a small woman walk towards something designed to break her. "You entered a pack member into the trial not to honor her, but to humiliate her," I said. "You took the oldest tradition this pack has, the one our founding blood built to find truth, and you made it a joke. You used it to mock a woman who serves this pack every day with her hands and her silence and her labor." I let the words settle. The crowd was very still. The trial answered, the wolves answered, the runes answered. "And you are the joke." Garen's face went from pale to gray. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. "Strip your rank pins," I told him. "You and your lieutenants. Leave them on the railing. Report to the steward at dawn for reassignment. You are dismissed from the warrior ranks." "Alpha," Falk started, his voice cracking. "Now." They did it in silence. The small sound of metal pins hitting stone echoed in the pit like nails being driven into a coffin. Garen's hands were shaking. He couldn't get the second pin free from his collar, and Messner had to help him, the two of them fumbling with a clasp that 3 hours ago they would have worked with the careless ease of men who believed their rank was permanent. I didn't watch them finish. I turned back to Asha. She was watching the wolves. Not me, not the crowd, not the ruined commanders. She was watching Storm, who had pressed so close to her leg that the wolf's silver fur was brushing the fabric of her apron. Her hand rested on the wolf's head, and her fingers moved slowly, gently, the way someone soothes a creature they understand without needing to be taught. "You're trembling," I said, quietly enough that only she could hear. She looked at me. "I've been trembling since the ramp," she said. "I'm just good at standing still." Something in my chest broke open, not painfully, not the way something breaks when it's damaged, but the way a seed breaks when it finally pushes through the soil. A crack that lets the light in. "Come with me," I said. "Where?" "Out of the sand, into the hall. I'll explain everything I can, and the rest will explain itself." She looked down at her apron, at the flour on her arms, at the wolves pressed against her legs. Then she looked back at me, and I saw the steadiness in her eyes shift, not breaking, not wavering, but deepening, making room for something new. "I'm not dressed for a hall," she said. I almost smiled. "I don't care." I offered my arm. She took it. Her rough fingers settled on my forearm, and the bond hummed between us. Not a sound anyone else could hear, but a vibration I felt in my bones, my blood, the 30-year scar that was still glowing gold against my skin. We walked across the arena. The wolves followed. All 11 of them, Ashen at the front, Storm at Ashaz's left side, the rest fanning out behind us in a formation no one had trained them for. They moved like an honor guard, like something older than training, older than commands. Something bred into their blood the same way the runes had been carved into the stone. We reached the ramp. I let Ashaz go first, and she walked up it the same way she'd walked down, steady, careful, certain, but different now. The crowd that lined the ramp's edges didn't laugh. They didn't speak. They watched her pass with wide eyes and closed mouths, and some of them, the older ones, the ones who remembered the stories their grandparents had told about the founding blood and the wolves who answered it, bowed their heads as she went by. She noticed. I saw her notice, and I saw her not react, not out of arrogance or indifference, but out of the same quiet discipline that had carried her down the ramp and into the sand and through the wolves. She held herself the way she held a bread pan, I thought, with both hands, with care, without show. We reached the top of the ramp and passed through the arched tunnel that connected the pit to the stronghold proper. The noise of the arena faded behind us. The wolves' claws clicked on the stone floor. Torchlight replaced sunlight, and in the shifting orange glow, I looked at Ashaz held, really looked, without the distance of the Alpha's seat, without the distraction of wolves and runes and a crowd of thousands. She was beautiful. Not in the way the court women were beautiful, with their powdered faces and their carefully arranged hair, and their dresses cut to draw exactly the right kind of attention. She was beautiful the way a well-made blade is beautiful, functional, unadorned, honest. Her face was angular, with a strong jaw and dark eyes that held light the way a river holds the reflection of the sky. Her hair was the color of autumn birch bark, a warm brown with threads of gold that caught the torchlight. The flower on her arms made her skin look even darker by contrast, and I thought of the years she'd spent in my kitchen, 10 floors below where I slept, kneading bread and stoking ovens and living a life I hadn't known existed. I hadn't known she existed. "How long have you worked in the kitchens?" I asked as we walked. 7 years, she said, "since I was 17. Where before that?" "A village called Thornhaven, on the southern border. My grandmother raised me. When she died, I walked north and found work." "And your parents?" A pause. "I don't know. My grandmother never said. She told me my mother left me at her door wrapped in a wolfskin blanket. She said the blanket smelled like fire." I stopped walking. Ashaz stopped with me, and the wolves stopped behind us, a cascade of halting bodies and clicking claws. "A wolfskin blanket," I repeated. "Yes." "What color?" She looked at me with a frown, not unfriendly but puzzled. "Silver white, with a black streak along the spine. My grandmother burned it when I was 6. She said it drew attention." Storm pressed closer to Ashaz's leg and whined, a high, thin sound that wolves make when they're distressed, or when they've found something they've been searching for. Silver white with a black streak. The Ashenmore coat. The founding line's wolves had been described in every surviving record as silver white with a single black streak along the spine. I'd assumed the descriptions were embellished, the kind of poetic detail that creeps into old stories over centuries. But Storm's coat was silver white, and Storm had been bred from the trial line, and the trial line descended directly from the founding wolves. "Your grandmother knew," I said. "She knew what you were." "My grandmother was a baker in a village of 60 people, Ashaz said, evenly. "She didn't know anything about trial wolves or glowing floor stones." She burned the blanket because it drew attention, I said. She hid you. She hid who you were. Ashaz's jaw tightened, not in anger, in the particular tension of someone hearing a truth they've suspected for a long time and have been afraid to confirm. She used to say strange things, she said after a moment. When she was ill near the end, she'd grip my hand and say, "Don't let them find you, Sparrow. Your blood is worth more than their war." I thought she was confused. She wasn't confused. I led her to my study, a stone room in the upper keep, lined with old shelves and older books, and the kind of dust that accumulates when a man spends more time in council chambers than in his own quarters. The wolves arranged themselves around the room, some on the rug, some against the walls, and Ashaz stood in the center, looking at the shelves the way someone looks at a language they can almost read. I found the scroll I wanted, a brittle, yellow-brown sheet of vellum covered in the cramped handwriting of an archivist who had been dead for 2 centuries. The Ashenmore Registry, the last known record of the founding line's descendants. Ashenmore was the bloodline that built Valdrin, I said. I unrolled the scroll on the table, and Ashaz moved closer to look. The first Alpha, Varen Ashenmore, carved the pit, bred the trial wolves, and established the bonding rite. The runes in the arena floor were made to answer his blood and the blood of his descendants. They were a test, not for warriors, but for the bond. The wolves were trained to recognize the bloodline. And then the line died, Ashaz said. Everyone believed so. The border war 3 generations before me. The last known Ashenmore heirs, a man and a woman married with a young daughter, were killed when their estate was burned. The daughter was never found. She was assumed dead. Ashaz stared at the scroll. Her fingers hovered over the names written there, the careful genealogy of a family that had been the spine of Valdrin for 300 years before vanishing in a single night of fire. She wasn't dead, Ashaz said. No. She ran. She ran south, to a village called Thornhaven, and she raised a granddaughter. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear the faint noise of the stronghold adjusting to what had happened, voices in corridors, boots on stone, the particular hum of a household absorbing news that changes everything. Ashaz sat down. She sat in my chair, the one behind my desk, the one no one sat in but me, and she sat in it not because she was claiming anything, but because her knees had given out and it was the closest surface. She put her hands on the desk, and I saw them shaking. 7 years, she said. 7 years I've been in your kitchen, and the floor knew, the wolves knew. They didn't know until today. The trial wolves are only brought into the pit once a year, and you've never been inside it before. Because I'm a kitchen maid. Because a man named Garen thought it would be funny to change that. She looked up at me, and I saw the steadiness in her eyes flicker, not breaking, but bending under a weight it wasn't built to carry alone. So the cruelest thing anyone's ever done to me is also the reason I'm sitting in your chair. Yes. She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound, and it wasn't a bitter one. It was the sound of someone arriving at a truth so strange that the only honest response is to acknowledge its absurdity. And the scar on your wrist, she said. I held out my arm. The scar was still glowing, fainter now, a warm ember rather than a forge flame, but unmistakable. The bonding rite, I said, cut when I was 14. It was supposed to burn when my fated mate was near. It's been cold for 30 years. And now it's not. No, now it's not. She reached out and touched the scar. Her rough fingertip traced the line of it, and the glow brightened under her touch, a response so immediate and so certain that there was nothing left to argue. The bond wasn't a theory or a legend or a dusty scroll. It was happening in real time under her hand, and we both felt it. I don't know how to be whatever you need me to be, she said. She didn't pull her hand away. I'm not asking you to be anything, I said. I'm asking you to stay. Stay. In the stronghold. Not in the kitchen unless you want to, and then we'll talk about that too. Stay and let me show you what the bond means. Let me show you what you are. What am I? The person every wolf in my arena just knelt for. The person the founding runes answered after 4 centuries of silence. The person the bond on my wrist has been waiting for since I was a boy. I paused. And from what I can tell, an excellent baker. She didn't laugh this time, but her mouth moved, a small, involuntary curl at the corner that she suppressed almost immediately, as if humor in this moment felt indecent. But I caught it, and I tucked it away in my chest like a coin in a lockbox, the first proof that a shack-held could be surprised into something softer than steadiness. I need to think, she said. Take the room. I'll be in the corridor. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The wolves stayed with her, all of them, 11 trial-hardened animals who had never followed a command from anyone but their keeper, lying on my study floor with their heads on their paws and their eyes on a woman in a flour-dusted apron. Brennick was waiting in the corridor. The council is gathering, he said. I expected that. Garen's men are loud. Some of them are calling it a trick. Old Meven from the northern wing says she remembers the Ashenmore records and wants to verify the blood claim. And Sorrel, my steward, a practical woman with no patience for drama, is asking whether the kitchen can function without its best baker tomorrow. I leaned against the wall. My wrist was still warm. The bond was still humming, fainter with the door between us but present, a thread I could follow in the dark. Tell the council to convene at moonrise, I said. I'll present the rune-light evidence and the trial record. If Meven wants a formal blood reading, I'll arrange it. And the woman. Her name is a shack-held. Use it. Brennick studied me for a moment, the careful, measuring look of a man who has served at my side for 15 years and knows the difference between a decision and an impulse. He must have found what he was looking for, because he nodded once and left without another question. I stood in the corridor and listened to the faint sounds on the other side of the door, a wolf shifting on the rug, a page turning. She'd found the scroll then and was reading. The creak of my chair as she adjusted her weight. 7 years she'd been in my stronghold. 2,600 mornings she'd risen before dawn and walked to the north wing kitchens and put her hands into dough and pulled bread from ovens, and I had not known her name. I had eaten her bread. I had praised the kitchens in passing, the way a king praises the work that keeps his hall running without thinking about whose hands did the keeping. She had been 10 floors below me for 7 years, and the wolves had been in their kennels, and the runes had been under the sand, and the scar on my wrist had been cold, and all of it, the wolves, the runes, the scar, the blood, had been waiting for one man's cruelty to put her where she was supposed to be. Garen's joke. The worst thing he'd ever done. The best thing that had ever happened to me. The door opened. Asha stood in the frame, backlit by the torchlight from my study. Behind her, 11 wolves raised their heads. She looked at me with those dark, river-steady eyes and she said, I read the scroll. And the last Ashenmore heir, the daughter who disappeared from the fire. Her name was Senya. My grandmother's name was Senya. I nodded. I'd suspected. Then you know. I know what the scroll says. I know what the runes did. I know what the wolves did. She paused. I don't know what any of it means for a woman who's been scrubbing bread pans for 7 years. It means the bread pans were never the measure of you. They're not nothing. I'm good at bread. I know. I've eaten it. That almost smile again, suppressed, involuntary, gone before it could settle, but present, undeniable, like the bond itself. The council convenes at moonrise, I said. I'd like you to be there, not as a petitioner, as the person the trial recognized. You'll stand beside me, not in front of me. No one will question you unless you choose to answer. And if they challenge the blood claim, then we'll do a formal reading. Meven will prick your finger, touch the blood to the rune stone, and the stone will answer the same way the arena floor did. It's not a debate, It's a fact. She considered this. I watched her consider it, watched the thoughts move behind her eyes like fish under clear water, visible but uncatchable. Fine, she said. But I'm washing the flour off first. The council session was not brief. I won't recount every word. The politics of a wolf pack's governing body are tedious even to the wolves involved, and the specifics of bloodline verification rituals, while historically significant, are not the heart of this story. The heart of this story is Asha Keld standing in my council chamber with clean arms and her hair retied, and the same kitchen apron because no one had thought to bring her different clothes, and the rune stone on the chamber's central table glowing gold the instant her blood touched it. Mevin, 70 years old, sharp as a skinning knife, the closest thing Valdrin had to a living archive, watched the stone's light with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. She reached out and turned the stone over. The glow persisted from every surface, top, bottom, sides, steady and unambiguous. Ashenmore, Mevin said, and her voice cracked on the second syllable, not from doubt, from something larger. In 400 years this stone has answered twice, once for Varan Ashenmore himself at the founding, once tonight. The council was quiet. 12 members, pack elders, territory wardens, the hunt master, the keeper of the trial wolves, all of them looking at the stone, then at Asha, then at me. The Alpha's bonding scar has responded, Brennick said from the wall, his voice neutral, factual. I witnessed it. The activation coincided with Asha Keld's entry into the pit. As did the trial wolves, added Kara, the wolf keeper, a weathered woman who had spent 30 years training the beasts and had never seen them kneel for anyone. All 11, belly down, they followed her out of the arena and have not left her side since. The council absorbed this. There was muttering, not hostile, but the kind of muttering that happens when people who have built their understanding of the world on certain facts are confronted with new ones. Old Harad, the northern warden, a man who disagreed with me on principle about most things, cleared his throat. And the commander who entered her name, Garen. Stripped and reassigned, I said. Harad nodded slowly. Not in approval of me, Harad didn't approve of me on general principle, but in acknowledgement that, whatever his feelings about my governance, the trial's verdict was not mine to have manufactured. The runes answered to blood, not to politics. The wolves answered to something older than command, and the bonding rite was a scar I'd carried for 30 years with nothing to show for it. Then the trial's verdict stands, Harad said gruffly, as it has for 4 centuries. The woman carries the founding blood. He paused, and something complicated moved across his weathered face. Welcome back, Ashenmore. He said it to Asha, not to me. And Asha, who had been standing quietly through the entire proceedings with her hands clasped in front of her and her expression unreadable, met his eyes and inclined her head. Not a bow, not a curtsy, but a nod of acknowledgement from one person who understood the weight of history to another. The council voted. Unanimous recognition of the blood claim. Unanimous acknowledgement of the bonding rights activation. A formal recommendation, which was really a formality, since the bond was the bond and no council vote could create or destroy it, that the Alpha King's fated mate be offered quarters in the upper keep and a seat at the council table. Asha accepted the quarters. She declined the council seat. Not yet, she said, when I asked her about it afterward. We were walking through the upper corridors and the wolves, reduced now to 3, the others had finally returned to the kennels, though Kara reported they'd gone reluctantly, padded alongside us. I don't know anything about governing. I know about bread and ovens and the best temperature for a rye loaf. Give me time to learn the rest. How much time? I'll tell you when I'm ready. I almost smiled. You don't negotiate like a baker. Bakers negotiate with dough every morning. Dough doesn't care about your title. We reached the door to her new quarters, a room that had been empty for years, across the hall from mine, with a window that faced east toward the mountains. It was sparse. A bed, a table, a chair, an empty hearth. She looked around it the way someone looks at a room they're not sure belongs to them yet. This was the founding Luna's chamber, I said. In the original designs, it hasn't been used since. Because there hasn't been an Ashenmore to use it. Until tonight. She stood at the window and looked out at the mountains. The moon was high, and the snow on the peaks caught its light and threw it back as something softer, silver blue, the color of Storm's fur, the color of the blanket her grandmother had burned. I keep thinking about Garen, she said. Don't waste the thought. No, listen. He put my name in the jar because I was the smallest person he could find, the most disposable, the one no one would defend if it went wrong. She turned from the window, and he was right. No one would have defended me. If the wolves had attacked, if I'd been hurt, no one in the pit would have stopped it. I'm a kitchen maid. My name's not on any list that matters. It's on one now. Because of what my blood did, not because of who I am. I crossed the room and stood in front of her. Not close enough to crowd her. I was learning already that a Shaz's steadiness had a radius, and that pressing into it uninvited would make her retreat not in fear, but in the particular withdrawal of someone who needs space to think. I watched you walk down that ramp, I said, before the wolves, before the runes, before the scar. I watched you walk into a fighting pit with flour on your sleeves and no weapon and no training, because a cruel man made a joke and you decided you wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing you refuse. That was who you are. The blood, the bond, the founding line, those are what you carry. But who you are is the woman who walked the ramp. She looked at me for a long moment. The moonlight caught the edge of her jaw, the line of her throat, the small scar on her left hand where a bread oven had marked her years ago. You're very certain, she said, for a man who didn't know my name this morning. I'm very certain for a man whose scar spent 30 years waiting to tell him your name. She didn't respond immediately. She turned back to the window, and I saw her reflection in the glass, faint, ghost-like, the outline of a woman standing at the edge of a life she hadn't imagined. Stay, I said again. The word felt different this time, less a request, more a confession. I was asking her to stay not because the bond demanded it, but because I had walked 42 steps across an arena and taken the hand of a woman with flour on her arms, and nothing in 30 years of kingship had felt as certain. I'll stay, she said, but I'm baking tomorrow. Whatever else I am, those ovens don't run themselves. The days that followed were complicated. I expected that. A 4-century-old bloodline resurfacing in a kitchen maid is the kind of event that sends ripples through every layer of a stronghold, from the council chambers to the cellars. The ripples took many forms. There were the formal ones. The blood claim verification. The rune stone was tested 3 more times, at Meven's insistence, in front of witnesses from every territory. It answered every time. The historical research. Meven pulled records I hadn't known existed and built a genealogy that traced a Shaz line from Senya, the fire survivor, through 2 generations of hidden women in border villages, each one moving further from Valdrin, each one burning whatever might give them away. The legal proceedings against Garen, who, stripped of his rank and facing a formal inquiry for abuse of the trial's sacred tradition, had gone from belligerent to hollow-eyed in 3 days. There were the political ones, the territory wardens wanting assurance that an Ashenmore claiming the Alpha's bond wouldn't shift the power balance toward the old founding families, the trade delegates wondering whether the founding blood carried obligations to treaties that had been dormant for a century, the northern holds sending envoys who wanted to see the runestone answer for themselves. And there were the small ones, which mattered more than any of the rest. Ashab baked. Every morning before dawn, she was in the north wing kitchens with her sleeves rolled up and her hands in dough. I learned this because Kara told me, and I learned it again because Storm, who had refused to return to the kennels, and had taken up permanent residence outside whatever room a Sha occupied, could be found each morning lying across the kitchen threshold, her silver-white tail blocking the doorway, her yellow eyes daring anyone to question her placement. I went to the kitchen on the third morning, not as the alpha, or not only as the alpha. I went because the bond was a thread I could feel pulling gently from my chest toward the north wing, and because I hadn't slept well in 3 nights, and because the smell of fresh bread at dawn is the kind of honest comfort that no amount of kingship can replicate. She was alone. The other kitchen workers hadn't arrived yet. The ovens were lit, but the big prep tables were empty. Asha was at the far counter, her back to me, shaping loaves with quick, practiced movements that made her shoulders work in a rhythm I found myself watching longer than I intended. Storm saw me before Asha did. The wolf lifted her head, regarded me with an expression I could only describe as tolerant, and put her head back down. Permission to enter, from a wolf, in my own stronghold. "You're up early," Asha said without turning around. "You're up earlier. Bread doesn't respect titles either." I leaned against the doorframe. "How did you know it was me?" She glanced over her shoulder. "Storm didn't growl. She growls at everyone else. Even Kara. She doesn't growl at you. I feed her. It's a transparent arrangement." I watched her work. The dough moved under her hands like something alive, responding to pressure, yielding at the right places, holding firm where it needed to. Her movements were efficient but not hurried. She worked the way she walked the ramp, with certainty that didn't need an audience. "The envoys from the northern holds arrived today," I said. "I know," Sorrel told me. She also told me they expect a formal presentation of the blood claim. "They do. And that I should wear something appropriate." "That's Sorrel's opinion, not mine." Asha finished shaping a loaf and set it on the baking sheet. Her hands were white with flour again, the same flour I'd seen on her arms in the pit 3 days and a lifetime ago. "I'll wear what I wear," she said. "If the runestone answers whether I'm in silk or in linen, then what I'm wearing doesn't matter. And if it doesn't answer because I'm not dressed well enough, then it was never about the blood in the first place." I felt the bond pulse, warm, approving, amused. I was beginning to understand that the bond didn't just connect us, it reflected us. It showed me, in small flashes of warmth or urgency or tenderness, what my own feelings were before I had words for them. Right now, it was showing me something that felt very much like admiration. "Asha." "Yes. I'd like to court you, formally." She stopped shaping bread. Her hands stilled on the dough, and she turned to face me fully. In the early lamplight, with flour on her cheekbones and her sleeves rolled past her elbows, she looked exactly like what she was, a working woman in a kitchen, at the beginning of a day that would ask impossible things of her. "Court me," she repeated. "The bond is the bond. It doesn't require courtship and it doesn't require your agreement, but I'm not the bond, I'm a man, and a man asks." She studied me the way she'd studied the arena, with that careful, measured gaze that missed nothing and gave nothing away. "What does courting look like for an alpha king?" "I have absolutely no idea. I've never done it." Her mouth did the thing, the almost smile, the involuntary curl at the corner that she couldn't quite suppress. This time, she let it stay a half-second longer before pulling it back. "Ask me again when I've finished the bread," she said. "Is that a yes?" "It's the bread can't wait, but you can." I waited, not in the corridor this time, in the kitchen, leaning against the counter watching her work. Storm watched us both. The ovens ticked and sighed. The bread rose. She asked me while the loaves baked about my childhood, not about kingship or the pack or politics, about me. What I'd been like at 14 when the scar was cut, whether it had hurt. Whether I'd ever tried to make it work, rubbing it, willing it to warm, holding my wrist near women I thought might be the one. I told her the truth. That I'd spent my 20s doing exactly that, attending every ceremony and feast with my sleeve rolled up, hoping to feel even a flicker. That I'd stopped trying at 35. That by 40, I'd accepted I would rule alone, and that the acceptance had settled into something that wasn't quite grief but wasn't quite peace either, a room in my chest with a door I'd closed and a key I'd lost. 30 years is a long time to keep a door closed, she said. It's a longer time to keep waiting for it to open. She pulled the first loaves from the oven, golden brown, steaming, the crust cracking in the way that means the bread is exactly right. She set them on the cooling rack and turned to me, and the lamplight caught her face and the flour on her cheek and the steadiness in her eyes that I was beginning to understand was not calm but courage. "Yes," she said. "Yes, what?" "Court me, formally, whatever that looks like when neither of us has done it before." The courtship was not what the council expected. It wasn't what the envoys expected. It was not, if I'm honest, what I expected. It looked like this: bread at dawn, delivered by her own hands to my study, still warm with a cup of the strong black tea she preferred. A walk along the western wall in the afternoon, with storm padding between us and the wind bringing the scent of pine from the valley. An evening in the library, where Asha read the Ashenmore histories and I pretended to work on trade agreements, and neither of us acknowledged that we'd moved our chairs closer together over the course of a week, until the gap between them disappeared entirely. It looked like questions. She asked them relentlessly about the pack, the territories, the council, the trial, the trade routes, the old alliances, the wolves, the runes, the border disputes, the grain stores, the water rights, the healers' protocols, the schooling of the pack's children. She asked the way a baker reads a recipe, not to admire it but to understand it well enough to make it. And it looked like the bond, the quiet, persistent thread between us that brightened when we were close and dimmed when we were apart, that carried warmth when she laughed. She laughed more now, in private. The almost smile had become an actual smile, which had become, on certain evenings in the library when I said something she found genuinely funny, a full and startling laugh that made Storm's ears prick up, and my chest ache in the best way I had ever felt anything ache. On the 14th day, she took the council seat. She didn't announce it. She simply walked into the council chamber at the start of the session, pulled out the chair that had been empty since her recognition, and sat down. 12 council members looked at her. She looked back. "I've been reading for 2 weeks," she said. "I have questions about the Southern grain tariff. It doesn't make sense." Old Harad, who disagreed with me about most things, looked at Asha for a long moment, then looked at the grain tariff records in front of him, then looked back at Asha. "It doesn't make sense to me either," he said. "It hasn't made sense for 8 years. No one's been able to fix it." "I think I can fix it," Asha said, "but I need the original contracts from the founding era. Mevin says they're in the deep archive." "They are," Mevin confirmed. "Behind the third seal, which requires the founding blood to open." There was a beat of silence in which the entire council arrived at the same realization simultaneously. The founding archives, sealed for 3 centuries behind rune locks that answered only to Ashenmore blood, had been inaccessible since the bloodline vanished. And the woman who could open them was sitting at the table, because a cruel man had put her name in a jar as a joke. "Well," Harad said, with the nearest thing to warmth I'd ever heard in his voice, "I suppose we should schedule an archive session." She opened the archives on the 15th day. I went with her, into the deep stone vaults beneath the stronghold, through corridors that hadn't been walked in 100 years, past rune-sealed doors that sprang open at the touch of her hand, the way flowers open toward light. The glow followed her through the dark, amber gold, the founding light, illuminating carved walls and stored scrolls and the careful, preserved records of 4 centuries of pack governance. She ran her fingers over the spines of the oldest scrolls, and something shifted in her face, the steadiness deepening into something that looked like recognition, not of specific documents or specific names, but of a place, a belonging, The sense of standing inside a room that had been built for you before you were born. "This is mine," she said quietly, "not to me. To the room itself." "Yes," I said, "it's yours." She turned to me in the amber light, and for the first time I saw her eyes bright with something that wasn't steadiness or courage or the careful discipline of a woman who had learned young not to want things she couldn't have. They were bright with possession, not of me, of herself, of the history she'd carried in her blood without knowing it, the heritage her grandmother had hidden to keep her safe, the weight and worth of a name that had been erased from the world, and was now, in this vault, in this light, being written back. "I want to be your Luna," she said. The words hit the stone walls and echoed. "Not because of the bond," she continued, "not because of the blood. Because I've spent 2 weeks learning who you are, and I've spent 24 years not knowing who I am, and both of those things led to this room, and I'm done standing in kitchens when I was built for this." I took her hand. Flour on her knuckles she'd baked before coming down, because of course she had. The bond between us wasn't singing now. It was humming, low, warm, steady, the sound a hearth makes when the fire has settled into the kind of burn that lasts through the night. "Then stand beside me," I said. "Not behind, not in front, beside." The ceremony was held in the pit. Asha insisted. The council suggested the great hall, more dignified, better seating, easier to manage the crowd. She listened to their arguments politely and then said, "The pit is where the wolves knew me first. That's where it should end." I didn't disagree. The council, recognizing that they were dealing with a woman who negotiated like a baker, which is to say, with immovable patience, and an understanding that the raw material would eventually yield to the right hands, conceded. The pit was different at night. The open sky above it showed every star, and the moon, full, because we'd waited for it, poured silver light into the bowl of stone until the seats glowed and the sand shone, and the runes carved into the arena floor pulsed with their steady amber gold, answering the blood of the woman who stood at the center. 3,000 people filled the seats. The same people who had laughed when her name was called. Some of them had been shamed by their laughter. I'd seen it in the days since, the way certain faces turned away when Asha passed, the way certain voices went quiet. Others had not been shamed. They had simply watched, with the particular attention of people who are witnessing something they'll tell their grandchildren, as a kitchen maid walked through their assumptions and came out the other side unchanged. Garin was not among them. His inquiry had concluded the week before. He'd been exiled from Valdrin with a year's provisions and the instruction never to return. His lieutenants had been reassigned to the southern border, where the work was hard and the winters were harder and the opportunities for cruelty were few. I didn't enjoy their punishment, but I didn't regret it. Asha walked down the ramp for the second time. This time she wore ashenmore silver, not silk, not velvet, but a simple woolen gown in the founding color, high-necked, long-sleeved, cut to move in. Meven had found the design in the deep archives, the founding Luna's ceremony dress, practical and dignified. Asha had approved it with one condition, that the seamstress leave the sleeves loose enough to roll up. "In case I need to bake afterward," she said. The wolves were already in the pit. All 11, arranged in a wide semicircle on the sand, sitting upright, ears forward, eyes bright in the moonlight. Storm, silver-white, black streak along the spine. The ashenmore coat made living sat at the center of the line, directly where Asha would stand. I was already on the sand. I'd walked down before her, waited at the center mark, watched the ramp. I wore my rank armor, the dark iron and silver plate that my father's smith had made, engraved with the Dravik wolf on the chest. My wrist was bare. The bonding scar glowed openly, gold against brown skin, visible to every seat in the pit. She reached the bottom of the ramp and crossed the sand. Her footsteps left prints in it, small, even, unhurried. The runes lit under each step, trailing light behind her like a path being drawn. She stopped in front of me. "You're not trembling," I said. "I'm not," she agreed. I figured out how to stop. How? I decided to mean it. I took her hands, both of them, rough and warm and strong, the hands that had shaped bread and opened sealed vaults and rested on the heads of wolves, and touched the scar on my wrist, and made the oldest magic in Valdrin answer. The ceremony was simple. The old words spoken by Mevin, because the founding blood's elder was the only one with the authority to seal a bond this old, were brief, deliberate, and entirely without decoration. No poetry, no flourishes, just the facts of the bond, the blood, and the choice. Ronan Dravik, Alpha of Valdrin, do you claim this woman as your mate and Luna, not by force, but by the bond that your blood has recognized? I do. Ashakel, daughter of Ashenmore, do you accept this man as your mate and Alpha, not by obligation but by choice, standing on the ground your blood built? I do. Then the bond is sealed, and the pit remembers. The runes blazed. Not the steady glow I'd seen before, a single brilliant pulse that swept across the entire arena floor, every carved line lit at once, a 400-year-old mechanism firing as it was always meant to fire. The light climbed the walls, raced along the stone seats, reached the open rim of the pit and spilled toward the sky, and for one breath one held, silent, impossible breath, the whole arena was gold. The wolves howled. All 11, heads thrown back, voices rising in a chorus that echoed off the mountain and carried across the valley and made the hair rise on the arms of every person in the stands. Not a hunting call, not a warning, a song. The old song, the founding song, the sound the trial wolves were bred to make when the bond they'd been built to guard was finally, after 4 centuries, complete. Asha looked at me in the fading gold light. Her eyes were bright. Her hands were steady in mine. She was not the woman who had walked down the ramp 16 days ago with flour on her sleeves and no idea what she was walking into. She was not anymore the woman who had needed to be good at standing still because standing still was the only power she had. She was the Luna of Valdrin, the daughter of Ashenmore, the mate my scar had waited 30 years to find, and she was standing on the sand of the arena where a cruel man's joke had put her, and she was not trembling, and she was not afraid, and she was mine, not because I had claimed her but because she had chosen to stay. The crowd rose to its feet. Not with the laughter that had greeted her name 16 days ago, not with the murmuring or the silence or the political calculation that had followed. They rose the way a tide rises, all at once, without decision, because something larger than any of them was pulling them to their feet. And they bowed. 3,000 people, warriors, merchants, elders, kitchen workers, the wolf keeper, the steward, the warden who disagreed with me about everything, bent at the waist, and the pit of Fang, the oldest ground in Valdrin, the stone bowl cut by founding hands 400 years before this night, held the sound of their silence like a cup holds water. Asha stood in it. She stood the way she stood in everything, steady, certain, unhurried. She didn't bow back. She didn't speak. She simply looked out at the people who had been her pack for 7 years without knowing she was the founding blood beneath their feet, and she let them see her. Then she looked at me and she smiled, not the almost smile, not the suppressed curl at the corner of her mouth. A real smile, full, warm, unguarded, the first I'd ever seen from her that she didn't try to pull back. "I think I mean it," she said. "I know you do." We walked out of the pit together, her hand on my arm, 11 wolves behind us, the runes fading to embers in our wake. The crowd parted as we climbed the ramp, and this time, the silence that followed us was not the silence of shock or the silence of understanding. It was the silence of people watching something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. At the top of the ramp, just before the tunnel that would take us back into the stronghold, Asha stopped. She looked back at the arena, the moonlit sand, the dimming runes, the wolves settling onto the floor as if they owned it. "One more thing," she said. "Name it." "I'm baking tomorrow, first light, and you're helping." I don't know how to bake. I know, she said. The dough doesn't care about your title. She walked through the tunnel, and I followed her, into the stronghold, into the rest of our lives, into the warm stone corridors where the bread ovens waited, and the morning was already closer than either of us realized. And on my wrist, the scar that had been cold for 30 years burned steady and gold, and I let it burn, because the door in my chest was open, and the woman who'd opened it had flour on her hands and a smile she no longer hid. And that all of it, every grain of flour and every wolf's howl and every rune's glow, was exactly enough.